Right, we are very excited to be here today with Dr. Robert Ostfeld. Dr. Ostfeld is a cardiologist and the director of preventative cardiology at the Montefiore Health System, and is an associate professor of medicine at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Dr. Ostfeld earned his MD from Yale University School of Medicine and a Master's of Science in Epidemiology from the Harvard School of Public Health. He is an incredibly smart individual, if you can't tell already. He did his medical internship and residency at the Massachusetts General Hospital and his cardiology fellowship at Brigham and Women's Hospital, both teaching hospitals of the Harvard Medical School. Dr. Ostfeld speaks widely about plant-based nutrition, and he does clinical work, he does research, and he does continuing education in plant-based nutrition, and encourages his patients to adopt a plant-based lifestyle. Thank you so much for being here today with us, Dr. Ostfeld.
Well, thank you so much for that generous introduction, and it's a real honor to be here with both of you today and to be talking about plants.
Absolutely. You're one of our favorite plant-based doctors. I mean, I feel like you've got so much experience and you're really doing a lot to not only promote plant-based diets with your patients, but also with other caregivers and with other medical professionals. So we can get into that a little bit today.
Thank you. And what you guys are doing with diabetes is just phenomenal and reaching, I don't even know, tens of thousands, millions of people to help them modify their lifestyle. The way you guys have been able to leverage this and touch so many lives is tremendous. So thank you both for what you're doing. I can scream from the top of Montefiore Hospital with my loudest voice ever till the end of time, and I will never come close to touching as many people as you guys have.
Well, we really appreciate that. And, you know, we're trying to spread the word as much as possible because plant-based nutrition is such a powerful form of medicine. And I think, you know, you maybe when you were growing up, me when I was growing up, certainly Robbie when he was growing up, we didn't know about how powerful plant-based nutrition really was or could be. And I think all of us have kind of come to epiphanies at some point in our careers, realizing that plant-based nutrition is without question the most effective chronic disease prevention and reversal strategy ever developed. And today we can talk about that specifically with cardiology because you have a ton of experience with that. So as a cardiologist, you frequently see people who have developed many forms of cardiovascular disease. And a lot of those patients, when we've talked in the past, are living with either prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. So can you give our audience a little insight here into how living with diabetes, or I'll call it blood glucose instability, how that specifically affects your heart tissue?
Sure. I mean, it's diabetes, as you know, is incredibly common, both prediabetes and diabetes, and it tracks with obesity. As our waistlines expand, so does the incidence of diabetes. And the diabetes that I typically see is adult onset or type 2 diabetes. Both type 1 and type 2, of course, can increase the risk for cardiovascular disease, but the kind that I see more commonly, and is of course just more common in general, is the adult onset or type 2 diabetes. And I should catch myself there because we call it adult onset diabetes, but it's when people get more overweight and eat less healthful foods, they can develop insulin resistance. So it was years ago, it happened more often in adults, but now we see it in people younger and younger, even in teenagers. So it's not adult onset diabetes, we call it teenage diabetes. So now when I see people with adult onset diabetes, it typically tracks with a number of other things like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, obesity. And these things all track together, kind of like a metabolic syndrome, if you will. So it can be tough to pull out the exact contribution of one versus the other. They're all kind of like in there pounding away at your endothelial cells, at your blood vessels, at your overall health, promoting increased inflammation and cardiovascular disease. Now, diabetes, you try to strip it away from the other things, is associated with a number of things. First, it can make endothelial cells function less well. The high blood glucose, the swings in the insulin can make endothelial cells function less well and make your blood vessels less healthful and more prone to developing atherosclerosis. The high blood sugar when it binds with different parts or different molecules in the body, can develop these things called AGEs, or advanced glycation end products, which are toxic to all sorts of cells, including blood vessel cells, liver cells, and in a way can make them age more quickly and function not like they did when you were younger. It actually promotes the aging process, if you will. So the advanced glycation end products are going to make blood vessels function less well, promote atherosclerosis, and make your body as a whole function less well. And of course, the milieu in which adult onset or teenage onset diabetes lives in is one where there's obesity and more fat cells and inflammation, one where there is higher cholesterol, and one where there's more high blood pressure. And specifically on cholesterol, what can happen is when one has diabetes, there's some debate as to the real impact of this, but it can alter the structure of cholesterol particles into a way that is felt to be less healthful. So it really comes at you from a lot of directions. And if you back up for a second, when I go to we have all these case conferences, like fellow teaching conferences and stuff, and it's always like, the 65-year-old person, and they just keep getting younger and younger. The 60-year-old person comes in with a heart attack, and they have obesity and diabetes and high blood pressure and high cholesterol. It's like a stamp. Like, you don't even have to mention it because they all seem to have those things. And what is the underlying reason for having all that? 99% of the time, I don't know exactly, but the overwhelming percentage of the time, is that they have not had a healthy lifestyle. And they're eating not healthful things. They're eating lots of animal products. They're eating fewer plant products. And that dietary pattern promotes all of those issues. Diabetes, the high blood pressure, the high cholesterol, the atherosclerosis, and we can go into some more detail as to why. They all live together. They all track together. So stepping back, having the diabetes, the adult onset diabetes, is really kind of a marker, you could say, of a very unhealthful lifestyle that's going to promote all kinds of problems.
It's amazing how simple it really can be to address all those conditions you just listed simultaneously. So, but, there's a lot of confusion. There is so much controversy on what to eat. So over the years, people are questioning whether dietary cholesterol affects your blood cholesterol values or not. We know for a fact that having elevated cholesterol levels is a risk factor for heart disease. Is it true that the food you eat affects your cholesterol level?
Yes, 100%. It is 100% true that the food that you eat impacts your cholesterol. And you're absolutely right. Blood levels of cholesterol matter. There are huge studies that they have these graphs. Basically, the lower your cholesterol level, the less atherosclerotic risk. The higher your cholesterol level, more. And it tracks very, very tightly. That matters. And dietary cholesterol impacts blood cholesterol levels. And the reason that sometimes people will suggest that it doesn't is, for example, there may be, let's say, egg yolks. Egg yolks have a lot of cholesterol. And so there'll be a study of someone eating 5 egg yolks versus like 10, for example, in a day. And when they do that, blood cholesterol level doesn't really change. So like, well, okay, so if you eat more cholesterol, that's not going to mess with your blood cholesterol levels. But there's sort of like, that's quite misleading, because 5 egg yolks have a ton of cholesterol in it, and your body can only absorb so much. So by the time you've eaten 5 egg yolks, you've basically saturated your body's ability to absorb more. And so if you eat 5 more eggs, big deal from a cholesterol standpoint, it's not going to make it rise. But if you look at someone who eats no eggs, none, and then you compare it to a couple of eggs, then you're going to see the difference because you haven't saturated the receptors yet. And then when you scroll down on the paper for these 5 versus 10 egg studies, and you look somewhere buried in the super small print, you will see they're often funded by the egg industry. So there's some ulterior motives there. And it really comes down to how you design the study. You can kind of make it show what you think it will show. So, but when you go from no dietary cholesterol to some, then cholesterol levels rise. And it's very different. People absorb cholesterol at different rates, some a lot, some less so. So the dose response varies from person to person. The relationship between dietary cholesterol and rises in blood cholesterol is not as strong for dietary cholesterol as it is for dietary saturated fat. Now, often those things go together. But dietary saturated fat raises blood cholesterol levels. There's this thing called the Hegstead equation. It's pretty well worked out. And that has more of a tight relationship of how much saturated fat you eat with raising blood cholesterol levels, and not as tight with dietary cholesterol. But they both matter a lot. And the other thing to know is, like, when I'm hungry, like I'm going to eat something later and I'm hungry, I'm not going to be like, well, I'm so hungry, I would love to have a bowl of saturated fat. God, I'd love to have a bowl of cholesterol. Like, nobody eats that. You eat food, right? So you eat the food. And so let's say you have a piece of meat. So yeah, okay, you're going to get the saturated fat in the meat. You're going to get the cholesterol in the meat. And then you're going to get the animal protein in the meat, raising insulin-like growth factor, which can promote cancer and diabetes. And in one study, eating animal protein raised cancer risk by 400%, diabetes risk by 500%, and increased mortality. And that's one of bazillions of different studies. That one was published in Cell Metabolism or Cell Research. I'm blanking right now which one exactly. So it comes with the saturated fat. It comes with the cholesterol. It comes with insulin-like growth factor. It comes with, in the red meat, heme iron, which is actually in chicken and fish too. The heme iron, which promotes inflammation, promotes cancer, promotes diabetes. It comes with the new 5-GC in red meat, which is a compound on the cell membrane that we humans don't have, but other primates have. And when we eat that, our body sees that as foreign, and it creates an inflammatory response. And investigators have suggested that reaction may also help explain the relationship between red meat consumption and diabetes and atherosclerosis. So there's new 5-GC. There's trimethylamine oxide, kind of the new kid on the block, where interactions with red meat and our gut microbiome via L-carnitine leads to the formation of something called TMAO, which is not your friend. The higher the levels of TMAO you have in your blood, the worse outcomes you have, the more diabetes, more cancer, more heart failure, and it promotes atherosclerosis. So, and we know that one fatty meal can worsen blood vessel function. So, the saturated fat and dietary cholesterol both can raise serum cholesterol levels, but they are not eaten in isolation. They're eaten in the context of a meal. And like, for example, with the red meat, we walk through just a handful of the ways that it can worsen your health. And it's funny, I want to circle to one thing, just even one meal. Let's talk about the impact of one meal. So one, breakfast meat sandwich, hash brownie meal, what can that do? Particularly compared to, like a whole grain cereal. Well, we know that an unhealthy meal like that can worsen blood vessel function in young, healthy men for up to 6 hours. So one unhealthy meal worsens blood vessel function. Okay, that's bad. One unhealthy meal can worsen lung function. In fact, asthmatics who have been discharged from the hospital when they eat more of a animal fatty-based diet are more likely to get readmitted to the hospital for lung-related issues. So, okay, it can worsen blood vessel function. It can worsen lung function. That's bad enough. But you know what? It can worsen liver function too. There's this thing called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is now the #1 cause of liver failure, more than alcohol in the US. And one unhealthy meal makes your liver look like it has, metabolically, like it has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Now, these things are transient. It goes away after a few hours. But this is just one meal. And then, okay, so that's blood vessel function. That's lung function. That is liver function. But you know what? It also messes up red blood cells. The red blood cells flow in our body and carry oxygen from our lungs to our muscles where it needs to be delivered so we can go walk around. But one unhealthy meal can change the shape of those red blood cells. They're usually really floppy and they can go through the little capillaries, but one unhealthy meal can make them all spiky. Who cares? Well, then they're not as floppy. And interestingly, there's an association with after having an unhealthy meal that people are more likely, of the kind we're just talking about, they're more likely to have a heart attack. Why might that be? Well, it promotes inflammation. It can make the blood vessels less healthy, but maybe those spiky red blood cells matter too. Because when you have an atherosclerotic plaque in the blood vessel in your body, which is promoted also by diabetes, it lives in the wall of the blood vessel. And the blood rushes by it in the middle, in the lumen of the blood vessel. And the only thing separating the wall where all that plaque lives and where the blood is flowing is this thing called the fibrous cap. It's kind of like the wallpaper of the blood vessel. And when that thing gets thinner, and over time with unhealthy meals, that fibrous cap can get thinner and thinner and weaker, and it can crack. And when that happens, all that atherosclerotic plaque touches the blood and it can clot and cause a heart attack. That's a medical emergency. All right. Well, if your red blood cells now are really spiky, maybe they just poke a hole in that fibrous cap, rupturing it after an unhealthy meal, exposing all the atherosclerotic plaque in the wall of the blood vessel to the blood, clotting it off and causing a heart attack. So that's one unhealthy meal. Blood vessel function, lung, liver, red blood cells. But then it's lunchtime. And then it's dinner time. And then the next day comes. And meal after meal, you're just pounding away at your whole body. So all those things matter. The saturated fat, the dietary cholesterol matters, and it lives in the food that we eat, promoting diabetes, if it's an unhealthy meal, among other problems.
You know, I'm really glad to hear you talk about the effect of one meal, because there's actually a substantial body of research that shows this specifically in patients living with type 1 diabetes who will eat a single meal that's high in saturated fat or a single meal that's high in protein that comes from an animal source. And then they will watch their postprandial blood glucose, excursions. And what they'll find is that the patients who consume higher saturated fat or higher animal-based protein end up with higher blood glucose values for a longer period of time. So they're going higher and they're staying higher for a longer period of time. And as a result of that, there's been this discussion that, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should factor in more than just carbohydrate into an individual's insulin dosing strategy. Wow, what an interesting concept, right?
Indeed. And in fact, saturated fat consumption, there's this interesting study where how saturated fat consumption was worse metabolically for the liver compared to even simple carbs, leading to more fatty liver, more insulin resistance. We will oftentimes, or people who may be espousing a different diet say, well, look, this one little itty bitty marker on our diet that, we would think is otherwise unhealthy for 15 other reasons looks a little bit better. Like maybe the blood sugar is a little bit better or some markers a teeny bit better. But nutrition is a symphony. Like when we eat one meal, it interacts with tons of enzymes and changes their speed of reaction. And the effects are multiplicative. It interacts with the gut microbiome. And then it has all these things that we were talking about that aren't even factored into this person who might be saying, well, this particular diet has one thing improved. Well, there's new 5GC and trimethylamine oxide and inflammation and oxidative stress, reactive oxygen species, advanced glycation end products, and on it goes. So, for us to think that we really understand all the nuances of nutrition, I think is hubris at its best, because it is an unbelievably complex symphony. And I think when we peel away the layers, it points to how plant-based nutrition touches on many of the pillars, improving it. But there's so many pillars we probably have yet to sort out yet. And then what that does is that makes me think, well, let's step back and look at these big populations that have, who are the longest living populations in the world? They're in the blue zones, of course, like right where you are in Costa Rica, close to Robbie and Loma Linda, California. So, and what do? They eat predominantly, overwhelmingly, a plant-based diet. There's no long-living population that doesn't eat predominantly a plant-based diet. And for me, at a 500-foot level, that takes into account the symphony. Stuff that we don't even know about yet. Yeah, the violins and the cello, but maybe there's 20 other instruments that we don't even know about yet. So I feel that makes me feel even more comfortable. And the fact that when we peel things away, like the new 5GC, like the TMAO, that it favors plant-based nutrition, that reinforces the benefits of this lifestyle even more.
So you talked about the fact that foods that are high in cholesterol, foods that are high in saturated fat, as well as advanced glycation end products, new 5GC, TMA, nitrates, sodium, et cetera, et cetera. These foods are predominantly found in those nutrients are predominantly found in animal products. So people who consume an animal product-based diet are going to be at a higher risk for the development of many chronic diseases. However, in the world of ketogenic diets, in the world of low carbohydrate diets, you can read in the literature and you can also observe anecdotally what happens to people, is that they switch over to a low carbohydrate diet and it works. And when I say it works, what I mean is that often patients end up losing a dramatic amount of weight, 30, 40, 50, 100 pounds. They end up reducing their risk for cardiovascular disease, reducing the need for hypertensive medication, reducing their fasting blood glucose, reducing their need for insulin, and a lot of other metabolic markers seem to improve. So why is it that somebody who adopts a low carbohydrate diet can actually benefit and improve their overall health, even though it goes against exactly what you just said?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think what it comes down to is really not hearing the full symphony. And in my opinion, it's missing the forest for the trees. First of all, there's no long living population that eats a ketogenic or very, very low carb diet. Some people will bring up the Inuit population. I think they live around Greenland or something, and where they eat a lot of animal food. Now, first of all, autopsy studies show they have a lot of atherosclerosis, but they actually they've evolved. They have a mutation which makes it much harder for them to become ketotic, which suggests that being ketotic is not friendly for your body. And mind you, being ketotic is like the fail-safe. You're like, if you can't eat glucose, which your brain loves and your body loves, if you're desperate and you're starving, then that's the backup plan. So it's the plan B, if you will. So now, okay, let's touch a little bit more on the ketogenic diet. First, there's no long-living population that eats that way. Secondly, some of the markers do improve, and that is because of weight loss, I think, largely. Now, you can lose weight with cholera. You can lose weight on a cocaine binge. Like, no one's going to argue that those are things you want to do. Now, in terms of the weight loss, what are we talking about? So when you eat a ketogenic diet, you have no carbs. So but your body needs energy. Your body typically runs on carbohydrates. We are carbohydrate run engines. We are evolved, I believe, to eat plants, eat fruit, eat plants. And many people will argue, there's a quarterly Journal of Biology and Review, that the reason that our brains grew is because we ate carbohydrates. Okay. But you become keto, you run out of glucose. We store glucose in our body in this thing called glycogen. And that doesn't last all that long. And so you use up all your glycogen stores and your body has to revert to another way to make energy, and it makes these things called ketones. Okay. So you lose weight because when you get rid of the glycogen, you use it all up. That is water avid. So you pee out all the water that the glycogen was keeping in your body. The next thing is the ketones are also water avid. And then when you pee out ketones, you pee out a lot of water. So there's a lot of loss of weight just from water. Like, so if I gave someone a diuretic pill, or if you had cholera, you lose a lot of weight because of water. And also when you are ketotic, you get this thing called the ketogenic flu-like symptoms, which may last a couple of weeks, and people are nauseated, they don't feel right, so they don't eat as much also. So you can lose weight that way. And there are plenty of studies that show no matter what diet you do, if you eat fewer calories, whether it's a keto diet or a plant-based diet or whatever, you're going to lose weight. So if you go on a ketogenic diet, you're going to pee out a lot of water. And if you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're eating fewer calories, you're going to lose weight. There's a number of studies that show that it didn't matter what diet you're on. There's one by this guy, Danziger, I believe, published in JAMA. You didn't matter which diet you were on, whether it was a zone diet or a low carb diet. It was the more you adhered to the diet, the more weight you lost. So it's really adherence to the diet, eating fewer calories. Some people suggest that, well, not only is it just lower calories that you're eating in the ketogenic diet that can make you lose weight, but there's something about being in the ketotic state that can just increase your basal metabolic rate, like make your body just burn more energy compared to some other way of eating. But it doesn't appear that that's actually the case. There's one small study that suggests that there's a trivial increase in burning of energy in a ketogenic diet, but there's a meta-analysis of 32 other studies that point in exactly the opposite direction, or that don't have that suggestion, and some suggest that eating a plant-based diet may actually burn more calories than a ketogenic diet. So, and then long studies, there's one long study, I think after a year or so, there was one, comparing a few diets, 1 kilogram more of weight loss in the ketogenic diet versus other diets. But that's probably not clinically meaningful. And other meta-analyses show that there's no difference in weight loss. So it's really, if you're eating fewer calories, you lose weight. So it is effective at weight loss. There's no question about it. But so are other diets if you eat fewer calories. And I think the reason you get the jump start on the ketogenic one is because you pee a lot of water out and you're feeling nauseated, so you eat less. So it gives you this sort of like gratification quickly. And when you lose weight, then some of these other markers just get better, like blood pressure improves, cholesterol can change, and actually blood glucose can go down. So let's talk about blood glucose or diabetes for a second on a plant-based diet versus a ketogenic diet. On a plant-based diet, there are a number of studies that show that eating more of a plant-based diet improves diabetes or makes you less likely to get it. There was a very big meta-analysis that just came out like today in the Lancet that eating more fiber, eating more whole grains, those are from carbs, you are significantly less likely to get diabetes eating more of those foods. And also, there's this huge study by Dr. Du in that Lancet study, in that Lancet just came out, they had 135 million person years of follow-up. Okay, if you follow me in a study for 1 year, that's 1 person year. They had 135 million person years of follow-up, and eating more healthy carbs, like unrefined carbs and fiber, you did better for multiple measures, including diabetes. In Dr. Du's study, they looked at about almost 500,000 people, and they asked, what happens if you eat more fresh fruit? Well, it turns out if you eat more fresh fruit, you do better, and you are less likely to get diabetes. What if you had diabetes at the start of the study? At the start of the study, they had 30,000 people with diabetes, and they looked at what happened if you ate more fruit. Well, if you ate more fruit, you did better. Live longer, fewer complications from diabetes. So those things argue, and there's no study like that I know of for a low-carb diet at all. Now, when you eat, and there is also evidence that when you eat more of a plant-based diet, it improves the underlying pathophysiology that is at the root of the adult onset or teenage onset diabetes. You improve the health of your beta cells that make insulin, and you make your body less insulin resistant. So if you eat a carbohydrate, after being on a plant-based diet for a while, if you eat a carbohydrate, your blood glucose will be less likely to go up, and thereby you are improving your insulin resistance. It's not necessarily the case with a ketogenic diet, and it may actually a saturated fat, which is often in a lot of these ketogenic diets, may not be healthful for the beta cells in the pancreas, and also can promote insulin resistance. Like eating more saturated fat can make you make more of these lipid compounds called ceramides, and they increase glucose production in the liver and they increase insulin resistance. So it's a double whammy. And if you if you've been on this low carb diet for a while, and then you sit somewhere near a carbohydrate and your glucose skyrockets, to me, you have not fixed your diabetes. You've masked it. So when you eat a low carb diet, you're not eating any sugar. Okay, so your blood glucose is going to go down, and it's going to look like you fixed the diabetes. But then when you sit near a carb, it's going to skyrocket because you haven't fixed the underlying reason for the insulin resistance. So you just masked it over, but you haven't fixed the underlying problem. And with the weight loss, blood pressure can go down. So you've lost weight, your blood pressure has gone down. You can, mask the diabetes, but it comes at a price. And the price is all those issues that we talked about before, the new 5GC, the insulin, increasing inflammation, the insulin-like growth factor, the oxidative stress. But the other price it comes with is the opportunity cost of not eating foods that are incredibly healthful, like vegetables, like fruits, which are carbs. And multiple studies show that eating that way is associated with less cancer, heart disease, with living longer. Why would you want to give that stuff up? And this just reminds me, this is not a ketogenic diet, but in a low carb diet, there's a cool study where they looked at people after heart attacks who adopted a low carb diet. That's a sick population. Well, you know what happened? They did worse. They did worse when they adopted a low carb diet. So I think that the benefits, in my opinion, the quote benefits in markers that people see when they adopt a ketogenic diet is kind of like fool's gold. And I don't mean that they're a fool. I just mean it as a figure of speech sort of way, because you're not fixing the underlying problem. You're exposing your body to multiple other deleterious things that we've walked through, and you're restricting from your body incredibly healthful things that in study after study are associated with improvements. And it's not just epidemiologic studies, it's mechanistic studies, and it's translational studies, and it's randomized studies, all kinds of different evidence. So I think it's fool's gold.
This is great information. We could go in a lot of different directions after all the good stuff you just covered there. But I want to continue on this trend of dispelling some of the myths and things people are confused about in the world of marketing. So a lot of people have been told that coconut oil and olive oil is heart healthy. So from your experience and research, can you tell us, is this true? Can you get to the bottom of it? And how does it impact insulin resistance?
Yeah, indeed. And I forgot there's one other thing about the ketogenic diet that we could talk about. Actually, do you mind if I weave it in right now? There's this study by a company called Virta Health. And that study is really the one that people with diabetes are looking to say, well, look, a ketogenic diet is helpful. And in that study, they found that people who did a ketogenic diet versus, I think it's just like whatever their usual diet was, and I'll dive into some of the structure of the study in a moment, they lowered their hemoglobin A1C. They lowered their blood sugar. Now, let's just back up for a second. It wasn't randomized at all. the people who adopted the ketogenic diet were self-selected. They're like, I want to do that. That is a priori incredibly biased. Furthermore, the control arm that continued their regular diet had far less intervention and touch points with the for-profit company, Virta Health, than did the people who adopted the ketogenic diet. So the ketogenic diet, they wanted to do it. They were into it. They had tons more touch points than the regular diet did. It was not randomized. And then almost all of the authors, I don't know exactly, so I can't say exactly, have financial ties to the company. I mean, it's just very biased data. And what it doesn't touch on, so it's very biased data, so I don't think it's really worth a lot to say that they found some sort of cure for diabetes. And then, of course, all of the other issues that we talked about remain with the opportunity costs, et cetera. So I just wanted to point out there are tons of weaknesses with that, what I believe, selected, biased is what I personally believe, and ripe with conflict of interest study. That is my opinion about how that study is. It's just my opinion. Okay, so now in terms of coconut oil and olive oil, I feel very, very confident saying that coconut oil is not a health food. And if you look at the Nutrition Controversies paper published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology through the American College of Cardiology Nutrition Working Group, they very succinctly say that coconut oil is something you should, quote, avoid. Why do they say that? Well, okay, coconut oil is about 90% saturated fat. And lard and butter are way less. Saturated fat, we know, raises LDL cholesterol levels. So now it's important to highlight that coconut oil is not coconut. Now you take the coconut and you suck out all the oil, leaving behind all the fiber and various phytonutrients. So it's just a pile of fat. Coconuts, although kind of calorically dense, they may be helpful, in moderation. But the oil itself is not, and as I understand, it's also associated with worsening endothelial function. So the ACC says avoid. It's 90% saturated fat. It raises LDL bad cholesterol levels. I think some people may counter with the fact that it's also associated with raising HDL level, which is a good cholesterol. But what I would say to that is a few things. Now, HDL cholesterol can be your friend or your foe. It can be healthful or it could be harmful. And one of the ways we can assess that is this thing called HDL efflux capacity. That means its ability to do reverse cholesterol transport or suck cholesterol out of the wall of the blood vessel. And it's the HDL particle's ability to do reverse cholesterol transport, irrespective of its number, that really drives its benefit. So if your efflux capacity is through the roof and your number is low, that's still really good. But if your efflux capacity is terrible and your number is higher, that may not be helpful at all. Furthermore, HDL particles can become oxidized and pro-inflammatory, or the opposite. And that is often driven by diet. And more plant-based foods can help improve the health and function of the HDL particle. And I have no reason to believe that coconut oil will be healthful for the particle, HDL particle. I don't know of any studies specifically on it, but I have no reason to believe that that's the case. And furthermore, it raises HDL cholesterol, and there's 120 calories per tablespoon. So no, I don't think coconut oil is healthful. I would avoid it. Put it on your skin, just don't put it on your plate, is my opinion. And the other, olive oil is less clear. Olive oil has more poly or monounsaturated fat. It is, of course, not a whole food. It's taken an olive and you suck out all the fat, leaving behind all the phytonutrients and fiber. There are studies that show that it worsens endothelial function. It is a part of the Mediterranean-style diet. And the Mediterranean-style diet is indeed more healthful than a typical Western style diet. Now, is that because of the olive oil? Is it despite the olive oil? It's not entirely clear. And interestingly, there was a very big randomized study of the Mediterranean style diet called the PREDIMED study, where the Mediterranean style diet did better than a typical Western diet. Like, no surprise there, diet's a continuum. But they did a post hoc or after the fact analysis of the PREDIMED study, and they got some pushback because, like, well, you didn't really look at how much plant or animal-based food people ate. Well, the more plant-based foods people ate, the better they did. So it just kept on going. So it was it's pretty impressive. So olive oil and the American College of Cardiology, the nutrition controversies papers is in support of olive oil. I personally ask my patients to avoid it because of the how it's not a whole food. I mean, have an olive, but I ask them to avoid the oil. And the reasons is because of the endothelial dysfunction, because of Dr. Esselstyn's incredible work where he has seen reversal of coronary artery disease in patients who've avoided olive oil, but that's just it's a case series. And anecdotally, in my patients who also avoid olive oil, they have some of the most obscene turnarounds you've ever seen. So I encourage people to avoid it, but the evidence base upon which I base that is nowhere near as strong as that where I use to ask them to eat whole plant foods. And that reminds me about something about diabetes in general. There are some pretty cool epidemiologic type studies where the more, for example, the Seventh-day Adventist study and study of Taiwanese people, that the fewer animal products you eat, the less diabetes that you have. And even in some of these populations, even eating animal products like the Taiwanese study and I think the Seventh-day Adventist one, even just once a week, significantly increases your risk of diabetes versus eating none.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of information that you've just given us is unbelievable. And my brain is kind of being split into like 14 different directions right now. But that being said, we focus a lot on the detriment of eating more saturated fat and the detriment of eating more cholesterol and the detriment of eating more animal-based foods because they can increase your risk for diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and a number of other chronic diseases. When it comes to plant-based nutrition, you are on the same page as us. You understand just how powerful of a medicine it is. And you see over and over and over again in your hospital how people who adopt a plant-based diet start reversing chronic disease, and they start doing it fast. So, question is, when it comes specifically to cardiovascular conditions like hypertension, high cholesterol, atherosclerosis, coronary artery disease, how effective is plant-based nutrition at treating each one of those? And is there any chronic condition specifically related to cardiovascular health that plant-based nutrition can't improve?
So the plant-based nutrition basically improves all of the things that you mentioned in my clinical experience. And I believe that's fully backed up by the data. And I should say, my motive is to get patients healthier. I don't have a book to sell. I don't have a product to sell. I actually earn less money practicing the way I practice. My ulterior motive is to get patients healthier. So if Woody Allen is right and we wake up in 20 years and fried chicken and ice cream are healthy, maybe I'll encourage my patients to do that. I don't think that's happening. My goal is to get our patients healthier. That's obviously from the sleeper. So all of those things I've seen, and I believe backed up by the evidence, gets better. For example, I have patients with crushing angina, crushing chest pain, who maybe they don't want to have a procedure to open up an artery, and which may or may not be helpful based on an interesting small study. But at any rate, crushing chest pain, we're not talking about a heart attack. If you're having an acute heart attack, you want a stent right away. But they have crushing chest pain, they don't want to have a stent put in, and I put them on a whole food plant-based diet, and I encourage them to not have oil, and of course we use medications too. They'll get better. Usually within a week, their symptoms begin to improve. It doesn't go away. It can take a long time. those angina symptoms to go away. But usually within a week, they start to see some improvement. They can go from only being able to walk a block, maybe a block and a half, if it's real bad, block and a quarter. But they begin to see improvements. Usually within 1 to 2 weeks, people feel thinner, their clothes begin to feel looser. Usually within about 2 weeks, I'll get a call if they're on multiple blood pressure pills and they're really eating this way. Truly a whole food plant-based diet with lots of greens, berries, herbs and spices. They'll call me because they're lightheaded. And what is almost always the case is that their blood vessels are getting so much healthier that their blood pressure is coming down, and we have to back off on the high blood pressure medications. And I don't check their cholesterol like every week, but like if they come back in 3 months later, we check it, and it's very frequently down 30%, which is often the amount you'll see from a statin. Now, mind you, I will use both. I look at prevention, we want to belt and suspender it. It's all of the above to help protect someone. All those things improve. In terms of, and then of course, all the evidence in larger, well-done studies showing improved, like atherosclerosis reversal from Esselstyn's work, from Ornish's work, improving diabetes from Dr. Barnard's work, and on, all the things we talked about before. In terms of, there are some conditions that a plant-based diet will likely not improve. If you have severe valvular heart disease, those are heart valves, which can, when your heart pumps blood to the body, and when it squeezes, for example, you have 4 heart valves. When it squeezes, it can pump blood through your aortic valve, which the aortic valve is in between the left ventricle. When the left ventricle squeezes, it pumps blood through the aortic valve into the aorta to the body. And sometimes over time, that aortic valve can get sick and become very tight. Normally it opens really easily. Well, it can get sick and barely open at all. A plant-based diet is not going to fix that. A plant-based diet will make you healthier in general, but it's not going to fix that tight valve. Sometimes your valve can be severely leaking. Plant-based diet is not going to fix a torn or severely leaking valve. Now, it'll make you healthier in general, which maybe would make you a better surgical candidate, but it's not going to fix that. And then there's some heart rhythm abnormalities, like if you have an extra electrical pathway in your heart that some people do that can lead to fast heart rates, it's not going to fix that. But those are exceptions rather than the rule. And just like you guys have talked about, there's not like a diabetes diet and a heart disease diet and an Alzheimer's diet and a cancer diet. There's evidence that a plant-based diet can improve all of these things. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to make you bulletproof, but there's evidence that it's good for dozens and dozens of conditions. So I don't think, and I'm sure you guys don't either, that there is a lung diet and that there is a cancer diet and that there is a heart diet. I think it's largely a whole food plant-based diet for the most part, and because it touches on all of these things in highly favorable ways.
Absolutely. We're in 100% agreement on that. Dr. Ostfeld, you have given us so much good information today. It's one of our best interviews of the entire summit. How can people find out more about you?
Well, you're extremely generous. But so a couple of things, like we see patients at Montefiore. So if you Google Montefiore and cardiac wellness program, you'll find us, and you can, if you want to see me as a cardiologist, we can do that. I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Ostfeld, on the Twitter at Dr. Ostfeld, and I'm trying to learn how to get good at those. I know you guys are going to teach me how, so I'll be really excited to, have some of y'all connected with me there. And one other thing I want to mention is now, I can't believe this, we're coming up, on our 3rd annual Montefiore Einstein Preventive Cardiology Conference. And some of the people you all know, Dr. Kim Williams, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Campbell, Dr. Barnard, Dr. Michelle McMacken, Dr. Danielle Bellardo, have been speakers. Dr. Joel Kahn have been speakers at our conference. I know I'm forgetting some names. Next year, Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard School of Public Health will be our keynote speaker. and it's sold out the last couple of years. So if you're interested, please check it out. It's going to be on November 2nd, 2019. So we've got a while. November 2nd, 2019. Keep your ears out. Soon we'll have the registration set up, and it's sold out the last couple of years. So would love to have y'all there.
I want to go one day, so I'm going to make sure that I come and just get to hang out with you in person. But, we've been friends with you for many years now, and I admire so many things about you. But one of the things that I think comes out so strongly in the way that you deliver information is that you're delivering it from a perspective of, yes, what you've seen in the hospital and the sort of improvements that you've helped promote for a lot of your patients. But you read the research avidly, and you understand the fundamental evidence basis for a plant-based diet and against a diet that's high in saturated fat, high in cholesterol, and beyond. So the fact that you blend the two of those beautifully, the fact that you're showing forks over knives in the Montefiore Hospital and you're allowing patients access to this information is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for promoting plant-based nutrition. And thank you for saving thousands of people's lives. You're doing a great job.
Well, thank you. Those are very wonderful words, and I really appreciate them. And I love the work that you guys are doing, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So thank you.